Now you came here for a 2021 Whitetail Rut Forecast, but I'm not going to tell you when the deer should be moving, when they should be going into rut, but how you should hunt them and why you should hunt them, where you should hunt them at one point and not another. But we're ultimately going to talk about the tools that you need to make sure that you're on track for when the whitetail rut is actually taking place in your area. And what's pretty cool and what I'm excited about, what I'm really excited about for this rut, is that every year those tools are expanding to let us know and research that shows when deer are actually moving and when they're not, when the rut actually takes place. There's been so many common mistruths and myths, fads in the past for when the whitetail rut takes place. I'm here to tell you, the rut doesn't take place as predicted by some moon phase or something like that. The rut takes place in the same time, at the same place, every single year. In your neck of the woods, the rut's going to be the same as it was last year as far as the timing of the rut. But there are a few differences. And even the weather, you know, I hunt by the weather. I hunt by the weather. I don't allow the weather to predict when does are actually coming into estrus, because that's not the way it's going to work. The weather will dictate when bucks are actually moving, the activity levels, when they're rubbing and scraping, when they're really getting going. And just think about it with you. If you're a runner, if you're a biker, if you're a hiker, and it's 110 degrees out, you might not go as far. You might sit in the shade all day. You might drink a nice cocktail, have some water, whatever it is, but you're gonna lay low. At the same time, if you have pounding rain, thunderstorms, blizzards, you're going to sit. Whitetails aren't that much different, and think of them. We have a house to go into, a car. They're living out in the woods every single day, and they have to go through every weather pattern that comes across your area every single day, month, time of the year, season, hunting season. And so while the weather does influence us, it influences deer behavior, it does not influence when does actually come into estrus. These are very important concepts for you, because once you understand the timing of the rut, then it's a matter of putting the system in place that allows you to be on a stand when you have the biggest opportunity to shoot a particular buck you're after. Now right here, we have a tree behind me, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I am setting a stand in that tree for Venti. He was a 21 point buck that we had last year. We saw him in the February, March here in the winter time, and we know he's alive, and we can't wait to hunt him this year. I can't wait to see what he was going to become. So this stand, I have Venti in mind because it's right in the wheelhouse on this property for where his daily patterns, where we were finding trail cam photos of him and his overall movements in this location. Let's back up a little bit. The rut will take place at the same time every year, but there's a big variable, and that is during the pre-rut. You know, I shot Kermit last year. We'll talk about this in a second. I shot Kermit during the pre-rut. What that means is that the does are coming into estrus. It's those first does from the year. They're about to come in, the bucks are getting ruddy, and there's a lot of activity taking place. But this is not the rut lockdown, for example, where bucks actually slow down their movements because they're on a particular doe and they're breeding her for a couple days. They can sense she's coming into estrus or fighting off other bucks. This is a long process. These bucks are not breeding 10 deer a year, 10 does a year. A lot of times on average, you're gonna breed 3 or 4, and that's stretched out over the primary rut, the second rut, sometimes the third rut. So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy to breed these does. And when those first few are coming into estrus, you can imagine the scent in the air and how excited bucks get. And if it's an old, wise, mature buck, he's experienced, he knows he's going to start laying down a lot of sign. He's going to move a lot more. That's when you suddenly get pictures of that buck on a morning water hole during 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, where before he was just content to stay back in his bedding area. Now he's moving more. He's developing a thirst, just like a runner, a biker, someone exerting a lot of physical activity. It doesn't matter how cold it is. You're going to drink water because you develop a thirst because of your activity level, not necessarily because of how warm or cold it actually is. A lot of times we're seeing our water hole use in the pre-rut pick up right when the temperature drops. So all of a sudden have a 42 degree morning and there's a buck on a water hole. So pretty cool how when it gets cold, they're more active, so they hit those water holes. Now let's just talk about if you have a core mature buck. We think Kermit was about a 6-year-old buck. He had the belly and the back to prove it last year in his body, but regardless though, he was a core buck. That means we have lots of sign. We have rubs and scrapes on the property that are active during the pre-rut. If you have to wait for a buck to come over from another property, and a lot of times they'll range out a mile or more during the rut, you're not going to have a lot of activity. So that's why those rut watches around the country can be so misleading. For one, it doesn't reflect your area, your region, even if your region of a particular state. But two, it can be very misleading because someone 2 miles away can have exceptional rut activity because they have mature bucks on the land where you don't, because you don't have a mature buck on the land. Mature bucks lay down an exponential amount of sign compared to immature bucks. So rub scrapes, a number of rub scrapes, they just lay it down, where a young buck is not going to do that. So you're going to see a lot more sign if you have a core buck. A core buck meaning that he lives in and around your land on a daily basis. You get consistent pictures of him in and around daylight. He's not coming at 2 in the morning and infrequently like a non-core buck. He's in and around the property. So if you have these nice core bucks on the property, then you're going to see some outstanding movement. Kermit was actually shot last year on October 29th. We had an exceptional video of him on October 27th. I actually sat in that same stand because the weather algorithm through HuntWise told me to do so. That's something I helped develop. So that's a part of me. I talk about it a lot. I don't talk about products very much at all, but that weather algorithm has a piece of me in it. So I have spent a lot of time helping to develop that. And the way I've looked at the weather over the last 3 decades, that's infused into that algorithm that is used through HuntWise. 27th was a great day to sit. Got in the stand, sat for 20 minutes. And the wind was just starting, it was getting light enough, it was starting to tail downhill. It was a light wind forecast, 3 or 4 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. Because of that, it started drifting down into areas I thought that Kermit might actually travel from. So I got out of there, went to a different stand. The weather was going to be good for another sit 2 days later. So I knew that, planned for it, and sure enough, we have a video, October 27th, Kermit came in from the direction I thought he would. He hit the mock scrape. He's hitting a scrape right now that's 25 yards in front of my stand. I shot him 10 yards from that location. Had I been sitting there, I firmly believe I would have spooked him out. So it takes that discipline too, and that's part of this process. You can't just say, well, HuntWise tells me it's a good day, the weather looks good, I have a buck I'm after, and you go in there and sit down. There's so much more that goes into it, especially as it relates to the patience and the strategy and planning you put into the entire process. Now remember, if you have core bucks, you'll have an earlier rut or experience earlier rut activity. It's going to take place at the same time. For example, the peak rut in Wisconsin here, you could apply that to Michigan, Minnesota. We're in southeast Minnesota right now. I hunt a lot in Wisconsin across the river. It's at the same time. But the peak of the rut's going to be in those first 10 days of November. If I had to guess a date, it'd be the 6th through the 15th, somewhere around in there, 6th through the 10th. It's going to be a very narrow window. Before that, you have the pre-rut around here. That'd be the last 10 days of October. But again, if it's an 85-degree day and 35-mile-an-hour wind, you're not going to see rut activity. It's a real roller coaster for the entire rut. Even during the peak rut, when things can be going great, if you get those exceptionally warm days, a lot of wind, it's not to say you can't shoot a buck, it's just to say the odds are very low. And if you're like most of us that have a limited number of stands and hunting opportunities, you can't afford to waste a sit or a location. I'm not going to come in here and sit in this stand behind me for venti on a bad day, because I could spook out this area, I could leave my scent here, I might spook other deer in the area and ruin an outstanding day that's just 3 days later. So it takes patience and planning. And what's pretty cool is that I could go through my entire rut in Wisconsin last year. I had about 5 opportunities I blew in the first 7 sits. I usually average a mature buck opportunity about every 5 or 6 sits. During the rut, you can shrink that down to every 2 or 3 sits, but it's because I'm only hunting on those best days. If you have a non-core buck in your area, that means infrequent pictures. It's about half of my bucks that I shoot. They're coming from a mile away. They're coming in the middle of the night. That tells you these coming from a long ways away. Bucks don't just sit back there on a knoll and wait for the conditions to get right at 4 a.m. and move. They're coming in at 4 a.m. because they had such a great distance to travel to get to you. So a non-core buck, I'm focusing more during that peak rut. And again, that could be the 6th through the 10th, 11th in most areas of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York. But when you start going a little bit south, when I hunted down in southern Ohio, and then you go into southern Illinois, when I've been down in Kentucky, over into Kansas, you can honestly say the rut is about a week to 10 days later in those areas. And when you get down the south, boy, you can have a rut December, January, February, March. You can have those trickle ruts that just keep happening, and that gets a little bit blurred too. But in those areas, the only guide you can have to go by is the weather. Make sure you're hunting the best days. Remember, look at those extremes. Bad weather, we're inside, they're not moving. Good weather, they feel comfortable, we feel comfortable. Pretty close relationship between the two. So think about that. Think about the timing of the rut doesn't change every year by some magical position of the moon that's just been disproved so many times and times again. In fact, Camp Cousineau Deer Research Facility up in Shingleton, Michigan, John Azoga, Lou Verm, and there's other people that were involved in that. Fredericks is another one. But those people up there studied deer for 30 years plus. That's just what they did for their living, white-tailed deer. They were able to ultrasound hundreds, if not thousands of does, hit car deer, hit whatever predation, but they were able to go back and look at those fawns basically like you would with an ultrasound for a person and go back to the date of conception. They found there was no variance for decades based on the moon or anything else. Obviously, even the weather. The timing of the rut was the same every single year. The only difference you're going to see is if you have mature bucks, it'll be about a week to 10 days earlier during the pre-rut. If you don't have mature bucks in the area, you can expect to push that back another week to 10 days. A lot of times people get into November 20th, November 15th in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, maybe the 25th of November in Ohio, Southern Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, over into Kansas, and they say, oh, the rut just hasn't taken place yet. You just missed it. And again, if you don't have mature bucks in the area, you're not going to see a really big, substantial rut. And if you're on one of those super properties that attracts a whole bunch of deer in the form of does, you're not going to see much of a rut either, because there's no challenge. A lot of times it's a stressful situation. So bucks are going to be in another location that has a balance of does. They have does to breed. So why do they want to come over to this property that has an overabundance of does, a high value, a high amount of stress, no cover left over for bucks? You might get a few bucks, but when you have an overpopulation of does, you're actually going to see fewer bucks, not only for the entire season, but definitely during the rut. So that balance of does and bucks is something that'll show you that the rut isn't happening. So I hope you understand that. The rut's going to take place in the same time. And when you know that, that's a comfort. You can actually go to a stand and say, you know what, it's November 7th. I know the rut's in full display, and that's why I'm going to go hunt this morning stand. That's why I need to switch back to an evening stand to look for movements in the evening. But just know that that rut, take comfort in, that rut's going to take place at the same time every year. That's a good thing. Now I'm going to talk about some tools in a second, but I wanted to express my excitement. You know, Kermit was an awesome buck we were after. He was my #1 target buck last year on the property for the first time this year. We kept him because of our food plots. We made sure that he was on the property consistently, that he focused during the daylight on our property because we didn't overhunt the stands, even be to the point where I knew he'd be moving on October 27th. I wanted to hunt that stand so bad. Made the right guess to the stand and his movement, wrong guess as to wind, so I got out of the stand. You have to have the discipline to do that. Right behind me, that big tree up there, Venti's a special buck. We don't know what he'll be this year, but he's going to be a really cool buck. We don't know how many points he had. He had 14 when he was a 2.5-year-old. He had 21 points last year. Who knows what he'll have this year as a 4-year-old. But he's going to be a super buck. And I want to kill him. You know, I want to shoot him. I want to find him. And this is my best guess for him. And I have a couple other stands. You can imagine I have quite a few stands out here, but I have a couple other stands with him in mind. But if I haven't shot him and it's the pre-rut and he's around here and we're getting pictures of him, this stand requires a post-day breaks entrance, meaning I wait for the fields to clear. I come in here a half hour after daylight. I get into the stand, and just like today, our wind is going right uphill here, and they're coming up with these draws. I can sit in that stand, and I can look down at a water hole and a mock scrape that we're supplying down on a pinch point that goes above a draw. I'll chainsaw off that pinch point so that they have to pass within 25 to 30 yards at the most from the stand. The water hole, the mock scrape, trail camera will be there. And you'd think the stand is so important. I'll clear some lanes for that stand, but that stand probably won't go until August. You know, Venti shouldn't be really around here. We haven't gotten pictures of him yet this year because this property now is not a summer property. All our food's related till fall. So although I really don't care if he's around in the summer, I want to see him during the summer. I want to see his growth. I'd rather he come here in the fall. Most of the time where bucks are at during the summer, they're not at in the fall, and vice versa. So I'm excited about this spot for Venti. And we have a couple other bucks that I'm after this year too. One's Costanza. Costanza's a pretty cool buck. He's got a little kicker off his 1G2. He's a stubby. So Dylan, you came up with that name, right? Costanza.
He's short and stocky.
Short and stocky, just like George Costanza on Seinfeld. So hopefully you can appreciate the comparison there. We name our bucks just because we need to tell them apart from Dylan, Dante, everyone else that's hunting here, my buddy Mike, Diane. There's a lot of people that are looking at these same bucks, so we need to name them and be able to tell them about it. It really gets confusing with the big 10, the wide 10, the heavy 10, the short 8, the short 10. We get them all mixed up. So I'm excited because Venti is a buck that I really want to go after this year. And then in Wisconsin, we have some super bucks too. So we have some really nice bucks. I'm working on my archery game, so I make sure I'm a little bit more in tune this year. I don't know what happened last year. It's just one of those bad years. Every 10 years I have a bad year. But this is a really exciting time going after Venti this year and for the 2021 Whitetail Rut. And I'm excited about the tools that you have. And we'll talk about just the phases of the rut real quick at the end of this and where you should be sitting and why. But I'm excited because HuntWise and the app that we developed throughout the hunting season last year and all the way beginning in February of last year is the first time we met. So going back well over a year, I've hunted by the weather since the early 90s, specifically by the weather. I'm looking for big weather temperature drops. Deer relate to feedings. They feed 5 times in a 24-hour period. So when you have major weather coming, when it's very hot, they miss feedings, they miss quality feedings, they're laying low. But when the weather changes and those temperatures drop, I'm hunting on the back side of that front, and it doesn't matter if the pressure, the barometric pressure is high or low. If you just had an 18-degree temperature drop, it doesn't matter if there's a storm coming in 2 days and the barometric pressure is low. Get out in the woods and hunt. At the same time, when that storm clears out, you have clearing skies. The day to hunt is the day after that storm clears through, right at the end of the tail storm, not 2 days later when the barometric pressure is higher, or 3 days later when the barometric pressure is higher. Folks, you already missed it by a day or two at that point. So really look for those major temperature changes. I hunt a little bit on the front side, but temperatures haven't dropped much on the front side. The temperatures have stayed consistent and hot for a long time, boring. So there'll be a little drop, usually the evening, the morning before a big front comes through. You have those easterly winds. It allows you to hunt some of those stands. Temperature might have dropped 7 degrees, but boy, I'm really hitting it when it's dropping 15 to 20 on the backside. And even a 10-degree difference is really good. I'm also looking for morning to morning changes. So you can have consistent forecasted daytime highs, 61, 59, 62, 60, 60. But somewhere in the morning there, because winds have died and conditions are changing, there'll be a morning where instead of being 47, 45, 46, 47, all of a sudden you have one pop up in there that's 39. That's the morning you hunt. And what the algorithm does and what the HuntCast does through HuntWise and that algorithm, that portion of that HuntCast and out of the HuntWise app, is it tells you all these different changes. You can just look at a weather forecast and you can look out to 10 days out because major temperature changes can be seen 10 days out. You can see those coming. I see them coming. I've planned on them for decades to hunt those times, and that's when I shoot my bucks. Almost all of my bucks are shot at 8 out of 10 days. All my best bucks, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. They're all in those top value days. Those top value days, you can never make up those top value days with hunting a lot of poor value days. So you need to pick those best days out of the forecast and do all you can to hunt them. I've even traded a long weekend of 3 or 4 days just to hunt one evening, one morning during the middle of the week, because that's when I needed to go hunting. I'm not gonna go burn out my stands on bad weather days. If you have limited time off, cheat your long weekend. Hunt more on the front side, Friday off, if it's good weather. If it's good weather on Monday, take Monday off. Maybe your boss or employer will let you do that. You look at it a week ahead of time and just say, hey, I really want to slant this hunt towards the end. Maybe break out your weekends. So you're going 3-day weekend, 3-day weekend, 3-day weekend, 3 weekends in a row. And that'll help you out too, because you're actually spreading out your hunt and you're going to hit some good days during that entire hunt. Now we're looking at, again, I talk about that timing. We figure that and we calculate a rut factor timing in with the various states' timings. For example, Kansas might be 10 days later than southeast Minnesota and southwest Wisconsin where I'm at. Kentucky might be 7 to 10 days later than southern Michigan. So you have to pay attention to those factors, but that's all built into the app too. So a great app that allows you to look at the days you hunt after you've narrowed down. You already know your timing for when the rut is. We build that into the app too, but the timing stays. And so that app is really a tool that just tells you you should go here and you shouldn't go then. And when I say that, you know, a lot of people hunt 9 days in a row. Well, during that 9 days, you'll find 2 or 3 days you probably shouldn't even be in the woods. You'll find 2 or 3 days that are exceptional, and you'll find a handful of days in between. You don't want to burn out your best days by sitting on a poor weather day and burning out that stand. So some great tools now to help you going forward for planning for the rut. I would urge you to check out HuntWise. The link is in the description. But on top of that, to me, this is a precision plan. We have Venti. We know his patterns. We know he made it through the winter. We hopefully makes it through the spring and summer. You just never know. We have a stand in place. We have multiple stands in place where we think that we can target Venti from. But it's not just that. We have to determine our access into that location. Once we determine our access, the stand location, we have mock scrapes. Maybe I have a mock scrape at almost every stand. We have cameras doing a lot of work telling us when those bucks are moving through the area. But then at the same time, all this planning, the right access, choosing the right tree stand, that's all. You take the guesswork out of it. You just look at it. This is the access, this is the wind, this is how I can go and hunt. And then you just simply look at the weather and let it tell you when to hunt. So this is a very defined plan. It's a very definitive plan, and it works. It doesn't work, of course, if you're hunting the non-core buck at a core buck time or vice versa. You can always kill that core buck during the peak of the rut, but at the same time, he could be a mile away on someone else's land. So you really determine what buck you're after, using some past intel, personal observations, current sign to determine when to actually go in and actually try to hunt him. And then you're picking the right stand with the right access, the right weather, and getting in there. And it's crazy because hunting less is hunting more and will improve your success. The old myth of you can't kill them from the couch has probably saved more bucks' lives than any other statement in the entire hunting industry. One of the worst statements ever. It's fun to joke around about it now, but obviously less is more when it comes to consistently killing mature bucks. And someone will say, my buddy hunts every day of the season and shoots a nice buck. That's not good enough for me. I don't have that much time to waste. I'll go fishing during the fall, bird hunting, hiking. There's a lot of other things to do in the fall besides sitting in a tree stand during bad days. I want to hunt the best days during the season after the best bucks in the area, not just a buck. There's a big difference from that. I want to target Venti. I want to target Costanza. And there's other bucks we have lots of real nice bucks that are named around this area that I could go after. Venti is one of, on the top of the list, but I want to go after a specific buck. I don't want just any old buck. And there's mature bucks around here. There's 3-year-olds I don't want to shoot. I want to shoot that decent buck. So knowing the right time, same time every year, having the right plan, using the right weather days, it'll lead you to success a very high percentage of the time, and I expect it to. That's what I've shown over the last 30 years, and not only my ability to do that, but the factors of the weather and the prediction for doing that as well. Now you look through the rut, the pre-rut. That's the first time I start hunting morning stands for the year. So I'll hunt that pre-rut timing. That's when I expect to hunt those core bucks that are close to home. I'm sitting up behind those bedding areas. I'm going in well away from the food and waiting for them to come back. That's my first favorite time to hunt those. I'm hunting evening food source movements, which is what Kermit was on. He was on an evening food source movement. He's hitting a small plot on the way to a big plot, on the way to an ag field, which is a destination field after dark. Most destination fields are dark, nocturnal plots, so that's what we call them for. A holding plot is one that holds them until dark. So I try to teach how to plant hunting and holding plots, not necessarily destination plots, which most around the entire country are after dark. That's the pre-rut. I'm hunting morning, and then I'm flipping around, because if you hunt a great stand in the morning, rarely should you sit in the same stand all day during the rut, because the closer it gets to dark, those deer are moving towards food. So if you're in a great morning stand, which is a bedding area stand, that means the closer you get to dark, the less likely you are to see deer in that location. So I flip out of that stand and go to an evening food source, not sitting on the food source and spoiling it, but hunting a mock scrape, a water hole, even a small hunting plot where deer can travel through that location of high attraction and pinch point to get to an evening holding plot that I do not want to spook out. Because on small properties, you spook out 1 or 2 holding plots, your property is done, and you don't have that much time. You don't have enough time to recover, or for your land to recover during the rut. The next phase is everyone's invited to the party. All those does are coming into heat. That's called the rut lockdown. That's where bucks don't move because they just had a flurry of does coming in. It's on the front side. It's on when the rut is still building. And then when it gets to the peak, that's when things start to break apart. Bucks are really actively seeking does. They're willing to move. That's that middle of the rut. That's that 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th, maybe 5th time in southeast Minnesota, Wisconsin, over into Michigan and maybe New York, portions of northern Pennsylvania. And then you have that peak rut of more the 15th through the 20th, southern Ohio over into Kansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma. And so that you can expect that rut in those areas to be pushed back. And then you get into some of the southern states, whether it's Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, where you can have that trickle rut. And in that case, you don't know when they're going to come in, but I'll tell you what, they're going to be moving a lot more when the weather is great. Then you have the post rut. That's when the big boys are still willing to move, but they're not going to move 1.5 miles and fight for the last remaining does if it's 85 degrees. So sometimes that post rut can be a bust, just like the peak rut and the pre-rut and the rut lockdown can if you experience warm weather. Again, it is a roller coaster going through that entire rut. The most often missed portion of the rut is the secondary rut. Just fast forward about 28, 30 days from your peak rut date, which would be early December for us, and we have exceptional second rut hunting activity and opportunities. I've capitalized on those with my muzzleloader a lot during that late season. We even saw some outstanding rut activity of a 5-year-old coming in and making scrapes all the way, and that was early January. That was during that third rut. So there must have been a random fawn or doe that came into heat. But guess what? Still the same factors for how you should access the stand. During the rut, I'll hunt morning stands, I'll hunt evening stands, rarely on one stand that captures it all unless it's in between bedding, in between feeding. It features that perfect X of movement. Otherwise, I'm limiting myself in one portion of the day, meaning the morning or the evening, and I'm not maximizing my opportunity. I score my sits, meaning that if this is a great morning stand, it's a 10 out of 10. Great morning conditions to get into that stand, it's probably a 1 or 2 out of 10 in the evening. So just to tell my friends, I sat all day, I loaded up on Instagram, all my supplies and snacks, went out for an all-day sit. That's not good enough for me to sit in that stand. I'm looking at it like you score that day a 20, a 10 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10 for morning and evening. I had a 9 out of 10 sit or a 10 out of 10 sit opportunity in the morning. Well, if that's a 2 out of 10 in the evening because all the deer are leaving and going towards food sources, then I only had a 12 out of 10 or 11 out of 10 for the day. Instead, I'm going to flip around to a high value evening stand and maximize my total potential score for the day when it comes to hunting the entire rut day and not just the entire rut day in the wrong stand because I wanted to say I sat all day in the same stand. I hope that makes some sense. There's a lot of myths that can be dispelled out there about the rut. The timing of the rut is the same every year. The weather, the moon is not going to, the barometric pressure is not going to tell the deer, hey, you need to go into rut, does need to come into estrus. They're going to come into estrus the same time every year. You need to determine if you're hunting a core buck or a non-core buck. That non-core buck that's going to come in the peak rut. That core buck that could be around any time, but don't let this peak rut slip by. Make sure you're looking at sign. Don't go by rut watches. If you have core bucks that are mature on your property and they're there all the time, you're going to have a lot of sign. You're going to experience the pre-rut. But if you don't, you're going to have to wait till the peak rut. So your sign's going to be 7-10 days later than maybe a neighbor that has core bucks or doesn't have core bucks, vice versa. And then finally, when you have that plan of attack like we do for Venti this year, make sure you don't spoil it by going in too early and ruining your pre-rut, rut lockdown, or peak rut opportunities because you burn out not only the stand but the area, the access. I want to come in here when I believe that I can actually have a chance of seeing Venti and getting an opportunity that I'm not when I think, oh boy, I just can't wait to get into that stand because it's a new stand. We have a cool water hole, a mock scrape, and I burn it out too early. I mean, terrible if I come in here on a bad day, leave some scent around, and Venti smells me, and he doesn't show back up in this location for 3 to 4 weeks. The rut's already over, and I missed my opportunity on him. 2021 Whitetail Rut Forecast. Pay attention to these details. Pay attention to the timing in your area. Hunt by the weather. And my forecast then for you would be success. If you follow the plan of attack like I've done for decades, if you watch the weather, tap into the HuntWise app, HuntCast, that'll really help you out. Do it on your own if you want. I've talked about this weather algorithm till I'm blue in the face, and these opportunities. Look up 2020 Whitetail Rutcast. Look up 2019, 18, 17, 16. I've done rut forecasts for all these years, and then even going back before then. Look at rut forecasts on Google and look at the timing, or November sit alert, November whitetail sit alert, those kind of things. I've had those articles going back for 10, 12 years at least. My all-weather whitetails book details how to hunt the rut within that book and how to hunt the weather and how it relates to your entire season. That's a 2018 book that I wrote. I have a third book that'll come out before hunting season this year. So whether it's web classes or books, we have additional resources to help you out with your hunt and your habitat. HuntWise can help you with the app with HuntCast, telling you which days to hunt, decades proven formula. And finally, enjoy the hunt, enjoy the preparation this off season, gear up towards the rut, because if you plan accordingly and appropriately, you follow these tools, you follow the truths about the rut, you'll find success for not only the 2021 whitetail rut, but for every rut that follows for the rest of your life. I'm excited to tell you guys about my latest web class. It's how to plant food plots, how to design your food plot program, and it covers everything. And really, there's 30 videos, over 10 hours, 11 hours of footage, workbook, hats, all that stuff. On top of it, I urge you to check out the link. But I cover 5 main areas: critical food plot concepts, where to plant, how to create, what to plant, and finally how to plant. It takes you through that step by step so you can make your own decisions that apply to you and build a great high quality food plot program this year, whether you have decades of experience or no experience at all.